Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session of Planning Development Control. Councillors of the committee who will take a vote at the end are sitting to my right and my left. I'm Therese Evans, Councillor Therese Evans. I'm the chair of the committee, and Councillor Jane Rutter is the vice chair, although she has stepped down for prejudicial reasons and declared that in the matters of interest at the beginning. Did that come across? You declared a prejudicial interest at the. She is the ward councillor. And then on the top table, as it were, we have Julie Pinnock, who's head of the service lead for built environment. Dan Lucas, who's our legal advisor, Lorna Hutchins, who's the planning manager. The case officer always sits where Kat Watson is sitting because she's the first case officer. And then we have Matthew Watson, the Democratic Service lead here. The instructions for the conduct of the meeting were on the screen. Hope you had a chance to read them. But just briefly repeating, please make sure your mobile phones are on silent or turned off. We're not anticipating a fire alarm, so if you hear one, it's the real thing, and please obey instructions which will be given to you by an appropriate officer. And this application, all applications, are live streamed and are also kept on the City Council's website, on YouTube, and there are words available, subtitles available for those who can't hear well. So planning appeals members were going to shift to the end of the meeting because we spent a long time on the first two applications. So we are on agenda item 10, which is 22/01587/FUL, and it's the demolition of existing and replacement dwelling and demolition of existing dwelling and a replacement dwelling and garage with associated minor site works at the Haven, School Lane, Headbourne, Worthy. The case officer is Kat Watson, and when you're ready, Kat, we're ready to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. This is the second occasion that this application has come before committee. It came in January and then was deferred for a committee viewing. That viewing took place yesterday. So the application is for the replacement of the existing dwelling, the Haven, which is on School Lane in Headbourne, Worthy. Next slide, please. Here we can see the existing site plan. So the area hatched in green consists of the current dwelling, which is a bungalow, and then the smaller building is an existing shed. Next slide, please. Here we can see the existing floor and roof plans. So we've got the roof in the bottom right-hand corner, and then we've got first floor in the top left-hand corner. Next plan. Here we've got the existing north and southeast elevation. So the top is north, the bottom is southeast. And then we've got the southwest and northwest elevation. So top is southwest and the bottom is northwest. Here we have the proposed site plan. So this shows the proposed dwelling with a garage linked to the main house. And you will see that there's a dotted red line that goes across the new dwelling. That's the outline of what is existing at present. There's a large turning area and parking area at the front of the property. The garage also has parking spaces, And then to the rear, there's an area of terrace which leads out into the garden. And again, this just gives us an idea of the layout. The room layout on the plan is showing the ground floor layout. And again, here we have the ground floor layout. So we've got a stepped appearance to the rear, that's on the left-hand side. Then to the front, we've got a garage which is attached by a link. And then first floor plan. So again, we've got the first floor on the left-hand side. At the bottom, adjoining that plan, is a single-storey element, so that will just extend across the ground floor and no higher. And then we've got a single-storey link to the garage, and there is some space in the roof of the garage. And the attic floor plan, so this is second floor, rooms in the roof effectively, and again it shows how it links up to the garage. And the roof plan, so we can see there's some dormers there and there's some roof lights. And here we have the proposed elevations. So the top one is northeast, which is the front elevation, and then we've got the side northwest elevation. So to the left hand side of that image, you can see the link and the garage. And then at the top here, southwest or rear facing, so you'll see that there is a single storey element there, and the bottom, which is southeast, again you'll see the sort of stepped level with a single storey addition. And here we've got a section, so that just shows how the layout of the building will be. You'll see, particularly with relation to the top image, that the ground will be cut down, ground levels will be cut down so that the property is more in keeping with the height of neighbouring developments. And then again, the proposed section and street scene. So the top image, the proposed dwelling is in the middle. On the right hand side is a recently built replacement dwelling called the Alpines, and on the left hand side we've got the orchard. The middle slide is a section through from the rear of the plot, which has an extensive garden, and that starts at the right hand side. It goes down. There'll be some excavation. The property will be excavated into the slope, and then it slopes down again after the garage to the road. And then at the bottom, that is the section through the rear. So the property's in the middle. We've got the orchard on the right hand side, and the Alpines on the left hand side. And here we have an aerial view. So the red arrow is pointing out the existing bungalow. Again, on the right of that bungalow is the orchard, and the left is the Alpines. And then here we have photos to the front of the site. So we can see the front of the bungalow, an area of front garden, driveway, and on the bottom right hand slide or photograph, you can see the Alpines. And then here we have some photographs along the boundary. So the left hand shows the boundary with the orchard, and the right hand slide is taken from the rear garden, and that's along the boundary with the Alpines. And then we've got photographs. So the left-hand photograph is the rear of the existing dwelling, and the right-hand photograph is taken in front of the existing garage or shed and shows the boundary with the Alpines. And then again, we've got more images of the boundary with the Alpines, so that there's a fairly newly planted hedge along that boundary. So again, looking from the front garden, front of the property, towards the orchard, you'll see that the land slopes quite significantly, the facing elevation of the orchard to the property is largely blank. And then here you can see that there's a shared access from School Lane. So the shared access serves both this property and the Alpines. Each property has their own driveway, but the access to School Lane is shared. And again, these are taken from the road. So the bottom right hand slide shows it's taken from School Lane looking up towards the site, and the top left hand is taken from adjacent to the verge where the boundary trees are growing. And that's all for now. The recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions and informatives contained within the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the members of the public, if they've got the update sheet, will notice that the first paragraph under the haven doesn't actually belong to the haven. It belonged to number 7 on the agenda. We've already dealt with that. So there's only one sentence about the change of name of Chesilme to the Alpines. So we have several public speakers. First of all, we come to the objector, Chris Welland. Good afternoon. So when you're ready to speak, you'll have 3 minutes, and if you press the button on the microphone, then a red light will come on. Yeah. So when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name's Chris Welland. My wife and I and our 2 teenage children live at the property immediately opposite the proposed development here. Now, we had some slides, Kat, that I think we wanted to show and talk through here, so we could bring those up, please. And fundamentally, we believe that both due to the overlooking of our property that will result from this development and the overbearing nature of it relative to the other properties nearby and their position to the road, that the committee should reject these plans in their current form. It's also unfortunate that no consultation was undertaken with all the neighbouring properties prior to this development being brought forward, which has necessitated the planning committee's involvement in this way. So this first slide is an extract from Ordnance Survey maps showing that our property, the cottage, sits at least 5 metres below the level of the haven, using the contour lines from Ordnance Survey maps. So, you know, sets the scene for that dominant position already that the properties on that side of the road, particularly this one set further forward than others, maintains. If we can move to the next slide, this is a panoramic shot taken from School Lane showing the site on the left, the proposed development, and then our property on the right hand side. Upon taking ownership of the site, the applicant cleared almost all the vegetation from the front of the property. There was a lot of historical screening there that we'll see more on the next slide. But although we're encouraged by the demonstration of intent, at least, to restore some of that screening that was seen by those members of the committee that visited the site yesterday, we are concerned, though, that one of the screens that was shown yesterday is actually on land that doesn't sit within the curtilage of this site. We believe the land that immediately adjoins School Lane is owned by a combination of the adjacent property and Hampshire County Council, but not by this site. So we aren't assured that screening provided there would be sustainable and something that would allow the restoration of screening of this property from ours. If we move on to the next slide, we can see before and after photographs from November 2021 showing the very established screening that was there at the front of the property in the site prior to the clearing that's been undertaken over the last couple of years. And obviously on the right hand side there is what you see today. It's a shame again that existing screening was cleared, because that would have mitigated a large quantity of our concerns, from the privacy and overbearing perspective. So if we could move on to the next slide, this is the view from our bedroom on the left-hand side, looking up towards the proposed development and the existing dwelling there on the left-hand side, and on the right from our patio, looking again across to the site directly in front, the top of the photograph there. Next slide, please. So in terms of our objection, we believe that the proposal contravenes both policy DM17 of the local plan part 2 and the supplementary planning document high quality places part 4, in that the development would be overbearing and would have a disproportionate impact on the properties around it, given its size and position within the plot, set further forward than the Alpines next door, and also that it would materially impact our enjoyment of our property due to the additional overlooking that would impact us that we've not had in the previous environment prior to this proposed development taking place. So those are the two specific elements of planning policy that we believe this would contravene. So,
Chair, sorry to interrupt, but that is 3 minutes.
okay, so if I could make a proposal, what we would like to see is the proposed dwelling move back on the site to improve the angles involved, and also that the upper window be turned into a velux rather than a vertical window facing our property.
Thank you very much. I have to stop you there. Thank you. But the members of the committee might have questions of clarification for you. Members? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Whelan, for coming along today. The next public speaker is the Parish Council representative, Belinda Baker. Good afternoon. Councillor Baker, when you're ready, the clock will show 3 minutes, and at the end of 3 minutes I'll have to. Yeah, that's it. Okay, when you're ready.
Headbourne Worthy Parish Council resolved unanimously to object to this application and asks the Planning Committee to do the same. There are 3 main reasons. Firstly, the proposed property will encroach into the designated settlement gap between the community of Headbourne Worthy and that of Winchester. Settlement gaps are there to provide a definition between 2 communities to ensure that each can feel different and independent of the other. If the gap is allowed to be reduced, then so does the ability of the 2 communities to differentiate themselves. For this reason, the council feels it is important to maintain these gaps. Otherwise, small communities like Headbourne Worthy will become subsumed into larger ones like Winchester. This property is positioned in a way that both physically and visually diminishes the settlement gap between Headbourne Worthy and Winchester City. It extensively goes beyond the outline of the previous building and does so in a way that dominates the others close by. I will now quote the decision given by Winchester City Council to planning application 22-01617. The proposal is contrary to policies CP18 and DM23 of the local plan and would result in the loss of an important gap between developments, resulting in unacceptable intrusion to the detriment of the rural character of the area. Headbourne Worthy Parish Council agrees with this decision and asks that the committee should show consistency and refuse this application on the same grounds. Secondly, the proposal is out of character with the adjacent buildings and the style of the area. It is an imposing and grand property positioned inappropriately down a single-track, narrow country lane. The council is not suggesting that all houses should be the same in the community, only they should not be dominated or overimposed by one house. Thirdly, the council would like to thank you for taking the time to visit the site, and I hope it gave you an understanding of the way the property is likely to sit in its surroundings and how it will affect adjacent properties. I hope you will agree with the council's view that the proposal will be positioned on the side of a slope, which will emphasise the height difference with it and surrounding properties and will create a feeling of dominance or preeminence over the neighbouring homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It could be that the committee would like to clarify points with you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I'm having a little difficulty, forgive me. You keep referring to the gap.
Yes.
This is a replacement property.
Yeah, the house, if you look at the footprint, as Kat pointed out, the footprint is now larger. So therefore that the property is larger. So you've got this feeling of it's a larger property than what was there, and that will affect the settlement gap.
Okay,
Councillor Pearson?
thank you, Chair. Belinda, one of the things I'm uncertain about, I mean, you talk about a gap between the development boundaries, and I've heard this many times, and we talked about actually on our site visit. And I look at the maps that we've been shown, but where I can't find where exactly the development boundary is. Because there's so many houses in that area, doesn't seem to be a development boundary at all.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to answer that at this point in time? Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that?
No, I was going to ask you to clarify any other points that you want to at the end, so we will clarify that.
Yeah, I'm
Councillor
fine
Pearson.
as long as I get the answer. I thought you might know, but well, then perhaps then Catherine is the best person
Yes,
to
I
answer that.
always ask the officers at the end of the public speaking, do they want to say something, which I will do. Okay,
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was very helpful to make the visit yesterday. Can I just clarify, because it seems to me that the houses on either side of the one we're talking about today are also relatively new. Are they both in the settlement gap, and are they replacement dwellings in the recent past, please?
The Haven has, that's got planning permission out at the moment, and that's gone to which City Council refused it.
So no, sorry, Chair, my question was that there are three properties in a line. There's the Alpine on one side and
yeah.
the Orchard on the other. Are all three, including the current Haven property, in the settlement gap? And are the Alpine and the Orchard look like they're replacement dwellings or perhaps previous dwellings that were there? Is that correct?
I'm confused. I've made it say the Alpines has got planning permission out at the moment. Chair, the Alpines have got planning permission and that's been refused. And that was the one that that was the planning permission I quoted that had been refused.
Julie, do you want to clarify?
I think, Chair, it's up to you, but whether you want to come back to the case officer for all that clarification afterwards, otherwise it's getting a bit muddy, doesn't it?
Anyone else want to ask the Parish Council questions? No, so thank you very much for coming along today. Thank you. And then the final speaker we have is Philip Carr, who is a supporter and the applicant. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So you have 3 minutes when you're ready, and the clock will start when you start speaking.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee, and thank you again for attending site yesterday. Addressing the main points raised an objection by the Parish Council and by the Wellens who reside at the cottage. In relation to objections raised by the Parish Council regarding the settlement gap, I would highlight the proposed development as a replacement dwelling and sits on the footprint of the existing building. The case officer highlights in the report, confirming there will be no impact on the integrity of the settlement gap. With reference to the comments from the Parish Council, an imposing and grand property for School Lane. School Lane is populated with several sizable properties, and this property will certainly not be the largest in School Lane. The proposed development is located on a plot size of 0.7 of an acre. The properties either side of this proposed development are of significant size, with recent approval of the Alpines having a ridge height of 3 to 4 metres higher than the dwelling it replaced. This application has an increased ridge height of only 1.2 metres and will sit below the ridge height of the Alpines and only 30 centimetres higher than the Orchard next door. For objections raised by the Wellens, I respond in sequence to the main points raised in their submission. The site is 5 metres above our property. Response. This is also true of the neighbouring properties either side of this proposed development. Care has been taken in the design process to reduce the levels to the same or below the properties either side. The building will impact the enjoyment of both house and garden. Response: the top dormer window is a light well to support natural light into a stairwell only and does not service a room. The first floor windows are approximately 40 centimetres higher than the windows in the current dwelling. Therefore, there is little difference and no impact. Overlooking existing windows. Response: there is a distance of approximately 45 to 50 metres between the properties, with an access road, trees, vegetation and school lane between. At 45 to 50 metres distance, it is highly unlikely you would be able to see into any rooms. A 6-foot high wooden fence on our boundary would not screen us from even the ground floor of this proposed property. Response: a site section diagram has been provided highlighting the assumption is inaccurate. Obtaining greater privacy is at the discretion of the Wellens. Their boundary is open rail fencing with limited planting, with their windows, patio and garden open and visible to passers-by walking along School Lane. To reassure all our neighbours, we value our privacy too, so we'll be working on a landscaping scheme that all neighbours will be beneficiaries of. This scheme will extend to the rear of the property and will also provide greater privacy for our neighbours in Lorna Doone and Four Winds through enhanced landscaping. I spoke before of our time as a family within Winchester and our desire to build a family home. I also highlighted that we had a personal need in relation to ensuring we have adequate provision for our disabled 16-year-old son. Providing him with a purpose-built area within our home is a priority for us, ensuring we meet his needs today and ongoing development into adulthood. In summary, the proposed development is a well-designed, high-quality home. The height and proportions are in keeping with the neighbouring properties. Our neighbours will ultimately be in a
I
better
have to
position.
stop you there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the agent? Councillor Reid.
You can stop me if you like, but earlier on it was said that part of the landscaping scheme that you intend to impose is not on your land. Is that correct?
So the land up on the other side of the access road is owned by the Alpines, and in discussion with the property owners there, we are not only supporting that landscaping process, but also actually the access road as well. And we have agreement with them to do that.
I have a question. I have two, in fact. I noticed that you are putting an attic in the roof. Is that going to be a habitable space?
So we intend to use that as storage and also working from home. So potentially some study element to it.
And would you be able to see the cottage from the window in the attic?
No, so the front window is only a light well, so it services the stairs to bring natural light in. That's all it does.
See. And then the second question is about the bins. There's been a question about the bin store.
Yes, I think that was raised in terms of it was a bit close to the neighbouring property. And I think potentially as well, because they've got an upstairs window and maybe a downstairs window as well on the other side of the fence. I think in terms of making some concessions around that, we're quite happy to support that, to make any alterations necessary to assist on it. But it will still be somewhere in the region of probably about 5 or 6 metres away from the other property.
Could I just explore with officers how that will be changed, the bin store?
Thank you, Chair. Referring to the bin store, Chair, was that? We have got a couple of conditions that we could potentially use to control this. So the prime one that I'm thinking of is condition 4, which is on page 157. Which controls hard and soft landscaping. If there's going to be a dedicated bin store structure, that potentially could be considered as hard landscaping, and so details of that could be submitted within that condition. I'm not sure if Julie or Lorna has anything to add to that.
Can I ask where the bin, could somebody show me where the bin store is? Oh, we're still in your section, so you
Okay, I could have, in the linked area between the house and the garage, there was an area to store bins there.
And that's what the neighbours are unhappy with, is it?
I think the concern was it was just a little bit closer. They're using the windows. It's about 5 or 6 meters away, and could we do something slightly different?
So, thank you. So, any more questions? Oh, several. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Could you inform us about the total gross external floor space you're constructing?
So the total, in terms of footprint
and floor space.
I don't have it. Probably Kat might be better to answer that than myself, but I think it's circa in the region of nearly 6,000 square feet. 6,000 square feet.
6,000 square.
That's the combination of the garages and the house.
Okay, Councillor Edwards. Is that okay? Yes, good. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, if I may come back to the very brief comment you made about the landscaping and the bit closer to School Lane owned by the Alpines. Is there any landscaping proposed on that boundary? Because I'm concerned about slope stability. And with that amount of vegetation having been removed, that slope is potentially quite unstable, as you know, because gravity will pull it down. So is there any consideration of landscaping, not just there, but also on the Havens side of the shared access road?
So the discussion I had with the property owner of the Alpines was supporting landscaping on the side of the access road.
Yeah.
We didn't discuss any further than that. And again, it's not my land, so I was supporting the privacy, but also the access point to both our properties. So there's landscaping planned for within the property, but also on the other side of the access road.
Because what I'm getting at is not just soil stability, but it also re-established the screen on that boundary between yourselves and the cottage.
Yeah.
Which is so important. I mean, although I must admit, our view from the entrance porch, the old entrance porch, despite the screens, even when I went alongside the screens, I couldn't see very much. I was trying to look in through the windows, but it was quite clear from that point, any visibility into the rooms there contained were very limited. So, but even so, landscaping on that boundary is essential for that and soil stability.
Just to support the question, we've owned the property for just over a year now. I'm not aware that any trees or vegetation were removed from that slope on that slide, but again, we've only been there for 1 year. I don't believe in our time that there has been a removal of trees or vegetation.
I was just looking at some of the photographs we've seen of School Lane, which is quite thickly wooded on either side of School Lane.
And I think we're obviously in that period of, I think once the foliage starts to come back on in the next month or two, we'll probably see a different picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. I did ask this question on site yesterday, but was advised I should ask it again today. The trees that are on the bank that are between the cottage and well, on South Lane, and actually go around to the left along Wellhouse Lane. Who are they owned by? Are they the county council, or is that or is that tree line owned by someone else? Thank you.
If you know the answer, do tell us, and otherwise we'll ask Kat to pick it up later.
I believe it's owned by the Alpines, but I'm not 100% certain on that. And so they have not participated in any discussions relating to that tree line.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for the agent? No. So thank you very much for coming along today. Kat, is there anything you'd like to pick up on from what you've heard in the public speaking?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate in response to the previous question of Councillor Horrells, that bank falls outside the application site. It's not within the applicant's control. I don't know who the owner of it is, whether it's Hampshire County Council or the neighbouring property. And any potential landscaping works would due to take place. That would be a private matter of discussion between the owner and the applicant. But again, it's not within the red line site, and it's not for consideration in terms of improving it or otherwise. If I can just come back to the parish council's determination of CP 18, which is the settlement gap, and what would erode the settlement gap. So our local plan policy part 2 has maps in the back, and you will be able to see where the settlement gap is. It's a gap between Winchester and Headbourne Worthy. This property is within the gap, as are the neighbouring properties. This is a replacement dwelling, so it's not an additional dwelling. I leave it to members to discuss what that may or may not mean. And with regards to the application the parish council was making about the Alpines, that was refused recently. That was for the new dwelling to the rear of the Alpines, and I believe it's currently or will be appealed shortly. So that's in my sort of interpretation, adding a new dwelling within the settlement gap is a very different situation to replacing an existing dwelling. But as I say, that's down to you and members to discuss that further. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. So we now members are moving into the report, and we start with principle of development, which the title is on page 152, but in fact it starts on 153. So principle of development and impact on the character and appearance of the area. Can I ask about the settlement gap again? We are told that it is in the settlement gap, but development's only allowed if it doesn't visually diminish the gap. And that's the problem I have really, because it is higher and larger than what it's replacing.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're right. It is larger and higher. The properties on either side, so the orchard and sorry, I forgot, the Alpines, are both replacement dwellings which are larger than those that they replaced. So it's more to the interpretation of the policy, and I'm looking at the preamble to the settlement gap policy, which, as you say, would not diminish the physical and or visual separation of settlements. It's part of a wider more built up part of the settlement gap. And then it would not individually or cumulatively with other existing or proposed development compromise the integrity of the gap. So whilst it's larger, it's set within a larger plot, the majority of the rear garden is going to be left as garden, so that retains a certain sense of openness that is shared by the alpines on the left of the property. So, but as I say, that's my sort of interpretation of the policy. But it'd be down to yourself and members to debate that if you feel necessary.
Yeah, thank you. The problem I have as well is the large development at the Orchard, which was allowed in 2013. So that there's quite a spread of building, isn't there, in the Orchard? Probably more than is proposed in the Havens. I can't understand how we allowed that development at the Orchard, but you weren't responsible for it. Anyway, that's what I'm struggling with in my mind. Any further questions? Councillor Pearson.
As I say, Chair, that horse has bolted, but that's not a comment about this application. There's 2 points I'm concerned about, obviously, from my question of the applicant, and that is the landscaping that bounds School Lane, that clearly from your photographs was originally there and is now largely absent in front of this site. As it's come back to soil stability on that site. Now, can anything be conditioned or anything? I know the applicant is not responsible. Somebody must be responsible for that piece of land. Otherwise, it's all going to slip into School Lane. But the other question I've got is that with the Orchard, no, the other side, no, not the Alpines, the other side, Orchard. All those houses along there seem to have backfill developments, the 2 and 3 houses behind them. Now, cynical observer of this site, it looks as a potential for 2 houses like Orchard go behind. Now, can we condition to stop that happening if we're minded to grant this application?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, with regards to your last question, yes. So further south of the Haven, there is a much more intense sort of pattern of development with several properties on presumably what were former single long plots. I would say, and then I don't know the circumstances of how those properties got there, when or if they were granted planning permission. What I would say is, I don't think it's, and Julie or Lorna might correct me, but I don't think it's reasonable to try and predict what someone might do in the future at the rear of their property. I would suggest maybe that it would be a similar situation to what has happened at the Alpines, where members took, because it's so open in the rear of those 2 properties, members took the opinion that it would diminish the gap, but we can't really say, we can't sort of condition for something that may or may not happen. I think I'm right in that, but maybe Julie is able to confirm.
I think, Chair, some separate application, some separate development there in the future would require planning permission, and that's your safeguard, isn't it? You can't look to safeguard something that's looking ahead in terms of something separate. If you're minded to approve this today, this would be an approval for a replacement dwelling with its garden, which it has at the moment. So, you know, that's sort of normal planning stuff. If you're looking to say, you know, you can't have a dwelling in your garden, that would require planning permission. So we don't need to sort of prevent that by condition.
The only safeguard we seem to have is the fact that this is in the development or rural gap between the 2 settlements. As I said earlier on, the horse seems to have already bolted.
Yeah, Chairman, if I could just clarify, it is countryside as well. So in terms of your policies, we're only looking at, and our recommendation to you to approve is on
Yeah.
the basis that it's a replacement dwelling. So we wouldn't be
Yeah,
recommending
yeah.
to you an additional dwelling.
Yeah,
because
that bit I
would be
understand.
contrary to our policies.
I know we speculated.
And
in
as
the
you say,
future,
yeah.
which we should do, yeah.
Yeah, so we can't.
Okay,
Okay,
All right.
thank you, Chair.
accept that.
Could I just, I've seen councillor Horrell's hand. Could I just, on the top of page 154, on this note, it's significantly larger than the bungalow it's replacing. So that doesn't matter then, according to our policies. Is that right?
In principle, Chair, yes. I mean, you know, you can replace something with something larger, subject to it complying with our policies. And, you know, you members went on the site visit yesterday. If you identify some planning harm, you know, whether that's visual or neighbour amenity, but otherwise, yeah, the principle of replacing a dwelling with something larger can be in principle acceptable. And that's, you know, hence the recommendation today.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the sake of clarity, could I just ask, so the Orchard, the Haven and Alpine are all in the settlement gap, and the Alpines and the Orchard are both replacement dwellings for properties that were there before, and essentially we're having the same request for the Haven, a replacement dwelling in the settlement gap, just for the sake of clarity. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, that's correct. Thank you.
And then, Chair, again, for the sake of clarity, if I may, one of the key objections is the view down to the cottage across the road. But when we stood on the site yesterday, the benefit of the site visit is that the trees obscure that direct view currently. So the ownership of the trees and the maintenance of that piece of land is sort of fundamental to providing a barrier. And I appreciate it's not in the development area, but an understanding of the ownership of those trees and the commitment to their longevity would be helpful. I don't know whether that is a reasonable question, given that they would satisfy one of the concerns of the objectors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I can only reiterate really, and I understand what you're saying, Councillor Horrell and other members have said, but the applicant, as he said, has no ownership or control over that bank which leads down to School Lane. As I understand from the applicant, it may well be the owners of the Alpines that do have control over that, or perhaps it's even Hampshire County Council, but it would be a matter for them to investigate, and if they want to jointly together provide some improvement to that bank, then that would be down to them. But it's not within the development site boundary. There's no the applicant doesn't own the land, so there's nothing that we couldn't impose a condition on this consent to say that he must, you know, plant more trees or improve that bank in some way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Right, so we move on then to page 154. So questions on the South Downs National Park, historic environment, it says no impact, neighbouring amenities, and in fact the rest of the report probably, yeah, the rest of the report, which includes sustainable transport, ecology and biodiversity, and sustainable drainage and the conditions. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, so indeed, I think one of the cruxes of this application is indeed the ecology, biodiversity and sustainable drainage. I mean, sustainable transport, I doubt if there's any transport in this immediate area. judging by the width of School Lane, but who knows, there might be. The landscaping, it's cut back to the landscaping again. This becomes crucial from an ecological and biodiversity point of view, and indeed drainage point of view. That is, looks like sand and gravel built there, which is relatively unstable on a slope at the best of times. So the landscaping and the walls that are proposed at the back of the haven, because of the platform that's being cut to sit the house in, must have some drainage facility through those walls. Otherwise, you're going to have a build-up of pressure behind that wall, which eventually will push it down. Then the landscaping becomes important because unless you've got a substantial growth of vegetation on that site, which isn't largely there now, it's just a lot of it bramble and rubbish there now, you need that to take the water off the site as part of transpiration and indeed as part of biodiversity. Now, can you assure us that, you know, from the information we've got that you show us in that plan there, that those two elements will be satisfied if you're minded to grant this application?
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of conditions which cover the points that you've made, Councillor. So on page 156, we've got condition 4, which I've mentioned before, to do with hard and soft landscaping. So although they've provided some plans with indicative landscaping on them, hard and soft, condition 4 gives us a lot more control over exactly how that would be and be implemented. We've also got condition 6 on the same page, which requires details including plans and cross sections of existing and proposed ground levels of the development and the boundaries of the site and the height of the ground floor slab and damp proof course, etc., to be submitted. So within those levels requirements, that would have an impact on how surface water is dealt with. And then also the council's drainage engineer didn't raise any objection, and he's included condition 8, which is that full detailed proposals for the disposal of foul and surface water drainage are to be required to be submitted and approved prior to commencement. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Good answer.
Thank you. Any further questions? So that brings us to debate. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is worrying on a couple of aspects, some of which are covered by the conditions that Catherine's minded to put in for us, which satisfies a number of my concerns about it. But I think the major concern is the sheer size of the replacement building, which we've always looked in the past about replacement building as being something like 50% or certainly not 100% bigger than the original. This is well above that. But having said that, I recognise what's happened to the houses on either side, where the same situation surely must have applied. I mean, I can't think that, as this is in the settlement gap, and I accept what you say about that, those houses are pretty equal size to what is proposed for the haven. So that argument goes out of the window. So, you know, that it's not sustainable. I like what you have to say in the conditions about protection of drainage off this site, because any water moving off the site is going to carry that sort of material with it. There's some problems left, which is not within the applicant's bound as to, it's probably with the Alpine's bound, and that is the access road. Our vehicles were skidding on that access road to get there. What it's going to be like in winter? Well, the Americans have a solution, I suppose, snow tires or chains, but that's not related to this application. It's the landscaping element that worried me most, but your answers have satisfied me. I think you've covered that point, thought of it. Well done for that. I think you're much more comfortable today than you were on this slide, but thank you. So I do support what you're saying, albeit sheer side. I think it's a lovely design, but is it in the right place? I don't know.
Thank you. Any further contributions to debate? As you probably understand from my questions, I have struggled over this settlement gap and the fact that the replacement dwelling is much larger than what it's replacing. I think I've just marginally been persuaded because I can't see any planning harm that it does, but I know it annoys the neighbours and the parish council. If I could be sure that the condition 6, which says it's there to ensure a satisfactory relationship between the new development and the adjacent buildings, if I could be sure that that meant screening at the front to protect the cottage, who I know are concerned about overlooking, and I hope it does it, Kat? Yeah. Then I think that removes the worry that I have there. The bank of trees, which doesn't belong to the applicant, it's not a developable site. So why would anyone want to pull them all down? It's just increases the biodiversity of the area. I do think that we possibly shouldn't have allowed so much built structures in, I'll forget the name of the place, in the orchard, because that is really a bulk of buildings, but it's been done now. And I can't see that what is proposed here at the Haven is that unreasonable. So on balance, I'm going to approve the application. And that brings us to the vote. This application has been recommended for approval. There are no extra conditions or informatives. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. So that application is approved. Thank you very much for coming along today. We'll just wait for a few minutes for officers to change over. This brings us to item 11, which is 19 Nuns Road, Winchester. Application number 22/02279/HOU. If you haven't read the sort of guidance for the meeting, could you please make sure that your phones are turned off or on silent? Members of the committee are sitting round and they've all been named. Next to me, I have Julie Pinnock, who's the service lead for the built environment, Daniel Lucas, who's our legal advisor, and Lorna Hutchings, who's the planning manager, and Matthew Watson, who's the Democratic Services representative today. This is a dormer roof extension. Case officer is Sean Quigley, who's sitting in the seat over there where all the case officers always sit. And when you're ready, when we're ready to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a roof extension at 19 Nuns Road in Winchester in the conservation area. Location and site plan there showing it in the north side of Nuns Road. There's an aerial photograph with an arrow indicating the property. You can also see there the relationship of the north side of Nuns Road with the open space area to the rear, which is Winchester Football Club, and the wider recreation ground there. Existing and proposed front elevation. Minor changes are proposed to the front elevation with the addition of a roof light. Side elevation, not particularly clear, but showing the location of the proposed dormer structure on the roof. There's the rear elevation, the north elevation again showing the roof structure on the second floor there, giving the additional space. There's the roof plan. Notable is there is on the right hand side there is the white area in the middle of the property is the roof of the proposed dormer. So it's showing you the scale of the extension in relation to the existing property. There's the first floor plans, just showing the internal arrangements, which I think are self-explanatory. Second floor plan, that's the showing the additional space that will be created by the dormer structure, essentially enlarging the third floor accommodation. This is an illustration of a similar proposal which was refused by the council in 2001, went to appeal, and the appeal was dismissed. So just to show that this kind of development has been refused before in this location, and the council's approach has been supported at appeal. And there's some photographs of the house, front elevation, street scene showing 19 amongst its neighbours, Edwardian houses, I think. There's the rear of the house, significant extension at ground floor. View from the rear of the property out towards the open space at the back on the recreation ground. View from Nuns Walk. We'll probably return to this because I think this is an important view. This is a public right of way which looks at the rear of the north side of Nuns Walk, of Nuns Road, showing the, in my view, the relatively unscathed roofscape of Nuns Road, which contributes to the conservation area. Again, a wider view, an arrow showing the property to be converted in its context. The application is recommended to be refused, Chair, for the reasons set out in the report, which mainly relate to the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We just have two supporters wanting to speak. Jeremy Tyrrell and Thomas Thwaite. If you'd like to come forward, gentlemen. Good afternoon. Now you're sharing 3 minutes, so presumably you sorted out between yourselves who's speaking first and who's speaking most, and you can both answer questions at the end.
We have, and I think we have some slides as well, which we'd like to share.
We had a breakdown in our normal system, which is why it's taking a little longer to get up on the screen. So when you're ready, gentlemen, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. As the architect for the project, I would like to address the officer's recommendation for refusal, citing the application's potential impact on the roofscape of Nuns Road. While an application was made for a dormer extension to 90 Nuns Road and refused in 2001, we believe that the circumstances have changed in the past 22 years, making it difficult to justify the refusal, given the vast amount of flat roof dormers that have been permitted in the area. To illustrate this, we have submitted examples from the surrounding streets. Nuns Road, Nuns Walk, Monks Road and Birinus Road all share the same house type and are located between the river and the wreck, forming a small community within the Hyde Conservation Area. On the next slide, I've included photographs showing 15 properties that have flat roof dormers within this community, all visible from the public realm, some far more visible from far more prevalent locations, such as the footpath that runs parallel to Birinus Road and Hyde Abbey Gardens to the south of Monks Road. This doesn't include the other alterations to the roofscape that have been made to the area, nor the 11 flat roof dormers within the central cluster of the houses, all overlooking one another to the rear. On the next slide, we focus on the odd numbered houses on Nuns Road. Many of them have been permitted to change their roof forms. Number 3 and 5 have converted and raised their roofs from hips to offset gables together, while 9, 15 and 23 have done the same without their respective semi-detached neighbour, thus unbalancing their original form and character. 5 others have been permitted to construct a pitched roof dormer, some of which have been criticised for looking like sheds on the roofs. I ask how any of these alterations are more in keeping than the flat roof dormer we have proposed, and why this row of houses is being afforded a higher level of protection than the rest of this area, where the footpath in question is barely passable in the winter due to poor conditions underfoot and is well screened by trees in the summer. The application has received 6 letters of support from immediate neighbours and no objections. Even the City of Winchester Trust have commented that this proposal is acceptable in principle. The applicants have lived on Nuns Road for decades and wish to provide more suitable accommodation for their children and grandchildren when they visit. Thank you for considering our application.
Thank you. So is that the end of your presentation? Yes, thank you. So members, any questions for the agent, the architect and Jeremy?
The one, Sharon, a very short question. Accepting what you just said about other examples, why didn't you approach the council for pre-application advice?
We didn't feel it was necessary given how many examples that there are of successful applications for very similar schemes.
I assumed that when the other similar designs went through, that was an element that was discussed by the planning inspector, was it, or was it not?
I'll answer that one, councillor. It's your question about why didn't we request pre-application advice? We have undertaken a number of applications like this in this area, both on Nuns Road, Monks Road, Lyrinus Road, Nuns Walk. I think at the last count probably 5 or more of similar designs, and we've never been required to carry out pre-application advice because the applications have never been contentious, and all those previous applications I've just referred to have been approved. So I think, as my colleague has said, we are struggling to understand why there's an additional level of protection being offered to just the north side of Nuns Road. We would contend that the south side of Monks Road probably has a higher degree of heritage protection, being the gardens of the former Hyde Abbey. And there are numerous examples of flat roof dormers such as this along there. So we didn't feel the need for a pre-application on this, is the honest answer.
Thank you both.
Councillor Rutter?
Thank you, Chair. They sort of go in pairs, don't they? These it's a terrace, but they sort of appear in pairs. And the matching pair to the application site has got a dormer, which is an existing dormer. Did it not occur to you to just replicate what was next door, so that the image of the house would not lose its, well, would regain some symmetry? Thank you.
To take that question, I think I understand your point, but our clients' requirements are slightly different from perhaps what their neighbours have in their roof. So just to be clear, our clients at number 19 do have a room within the roof, simply served by roof lights, but they wish to expand that room, not add another room. And the design we have prepared suits their brief, as we have done for other similar properties without a problem before. I think you're right. There is an element, or there was an element of paired rhythm across the back of these houses originally in Edwardian times when they were built. That rhythm, and they are in pairs, they're not terraced, has been upset, I think, beyond all recognition by certain houses building an offset raised ridge over their outshot, for example, and numerous ones of those have been approved. I mean, to use the word that the Winchester Trust have put in their neutral comment, the roofscape is already a hodgepodge. And I don't think the design we have proposed exacerbates that. So hopefully does that answer your question?
Reading the report, the criticism seems to be that the proposed development will be visible from the public realm, and also that the majority of the development will be concentrated on the rear roof. And the City of Winchester Trust says the fenestration of the dormer window to the rear was clumsy. Any of your thoughts on those comments?
We've actually revised the drawings since that comment was made, and we've simplified the fenestration on that on the dormer to address that comment from City of Winchester Trust.
But you didn't take pre-application advice?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? No, so thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming along today. And Sean, anything you'd like to add from the public participation?
Thank you, Chair. If we could go to the aerial shot, a couple of slides in. I think the previous speaker has gone right to the main point of this application, and he asked the question, why is this roofscape offered more protection than the wider area? And the reason for that is that this slide shows this roofscape effectively forms the northern boundary of the conservation area. And it backs on to a very busy public area, publicly accessible footpaths. And they can basically say that the defence of that was it's impassable in winter. I mean, it is not impassable in winter. It is passable for most of the year. So the importance of this, what we say is a relatively uncomplicated roofscape. It has had changes to it, but it is relatively unscathed, and it presents the public face, if you like, of this conservation area. So when you arrive in this public space, and your first view of the conservation area is of that roofscape. So it's very, very important. And I think if members allow this scheme, which in my view is has a very detrimental impact on that roofscape, and therefore on the house, and therefore on the conservation area, that might be a slippery slope where you end up with a hodgepodge by the applicant's own agent's own description, a hodgepodge of a roofscape. And that would, in my view, undermine the efforts that the council has taken to date to protect that roofscape. But that's not to say, I don't say it's uninterrupted. It has had changes, but the changes that have happened are more in keeping, are sympathetic, are elegant in a lot of cases, and this application is not. The corollary of that is that the examples that the presenter showed are in the, if you could just move that slide up a little bit, are in the hinterland between Monk's Road and Nuns Road. So to a large extent, they're hidden from public view. They can be seen from public domain. In the main, they're not. So it's a completely different aspect. So that's the reason why this application is different, and that's why it should be refused.
Thank you. It is sort of a very shortish report, so questions on anything in the report? Councillor Horan.
Chair, would it be acceptable to see the photograph that was put up of the other roofscapes, as Shaw's just talked about? So are any of those that we've seen on the photograph in the same run as the applicant? There were various numbers across Nuns Road. I'm not sure which sequence and which side of the road they were.
They're on the agent's presentation, yes.
Thank you.
They're not labelled, so they're not very helpful. But my understanding, the majority of those are in that hinterland area that I described, and which the agent described as a hodgepodge, which I agree with.
Chairman, if I might add, and I appreciate the appeal decision was some years ago now, but the inspector at that time, and I appreciate things might have changed, didn't perhaps quite use that language, but talked about some of those other roof structures in the areas being an exception and do not in themselves significantly affect the appearance of the area, whereas the proposal back in, I think it was 2001, in the inspector's view did. So, just to give a bit of flesh there to the appeal decision.
Perhaps if members could keep this character in their mind. If we go back to my presentation with the long shot of the roofscape from the open space area to the back, I think it's right at the end of that presentation. I think that. So that one. So, contrast that, a relatively unscathed roofscape, with previous slide. I think that is all you need to know.
Thank you. Any further questions on the report? No. So debate? Councillor Rutter?
I'd just like to say, I think that this is a classic example of where our officers are drawing a line, and you know, we should take due consideration of that. Certain amounts of dormer windows have been allowed and have been seen to be in keeping and in character and not damaging that very distinctive roof line. This proposal crosses that line, and I think we should support our officers and support our conservation area and ask the applicant to go away and think again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I too recognise this is a conservation area, and I think this kind of extension with a flat roof at ridge height is potentially very damaging. And although we've seen examples in other streets, you referred to as perhaps not so visible to public gaze, I don't see any in the north part of Nuns Road which have that feature, flat roof at ridge height, and it does break the flow of the roofscape, which is important. Although, whilst I understand this is a difficult one, bearing in mind people's reasonable wishes to extend their homes, I would support the recommendation that we draw the line against this application.
Councillor Pearson?
Yes, I mean, Chair, I'm inclined to agree with that. Effectively, our hands are tied by the planning inspectors, but I understand the argument being put forward by Sean about the roof line. I mean, I have a dormer window myself, but it's not flat. I've got a personal suspicion of flat roofs anyway, because they tend to leak too darn quickly. But I can understand the application's desire to have a larger house, but without moving, which is often a great deal more expensive. And so I have full sympathy, but that is tempered by the fact, well, why on earth didn't you have pre-application advice where perhaps you could have produced something which would have been acceptable, as you hadn't. I regret to say, on your behalf, that I've got to go along with the advice of the planning officer for the reason that Councillor Rutter said and Councillor Edwards said, that it's a drawn line. I mean, this was originally, I suspect, an Edwardian terrace, which every unit on that terrace was identical. Following from that, you've had this sort of piecemeal development, which somehow has got through different aspects of planning, but we've reached a point where now, as it's now a conservation area, deemed to be ideal examples of that type of architecture, we've got to say, well, no, as the planning inspectors virtually said this, despite the precedents, enough is enough. And so I've got to go along with, I don't know who wrote the report, but what a short presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further contributions? And I agree that it is against our policies, both of Local Plan Part 1 and Part 2, and they're all listed in the recommendation for refusal. So this application is recommended for refusal for those reasons. There are no extra conditions on the update sheet. All those in favour of refusing the application, please show. Nine, yeah, unanimous, yeah. Thank you very much. So that application is refused. We move then on to item number 12, which is the 10 The Soak, Alresford. please feel free to go if your application has been dealt with.
Just need to swap offices.
Yeah. So we move on then to our next item on the agenda, agenda item 12. This is at 10 the Soak, Alresford, and it's 22/01816/FUL, and it's the demolition of existing and proposed replacement dwelling and garage and associated minor site works. The case officer is Cameron Taylor, and Cameron, when you're ready, so away.
Thank you, Chair. So this presentation is for the demolition of the existing dwelling and replacement dwelling, say in garage, along with the associated minor works. So on the slide, we have the location plan on the left plan, and the right plan is the site plan, which we can see the extent of the proposed development, which also shows the footprint of the existing dwelling. Next. Here we have the aerial photograph of the area with the site marked by the yellow triangle, where there's actually the Alresford Pond, which is located to the east of the site itself, with the river which then follows down along the southern boundary. Here we have the north elevations, which sort of are on the front where the access is, with the existing being at the top and proposed being the bottom. Again, further north elevations, however, this gives you a wider view, sort of give more context towards the site itself. Next, we have the photo looking toward the north elevation to the front of sort of where the listed buildings are, we can say, with the dwelling in the background being that of the site itself, and a view from the opposite side of the B3046 looking towards the site. Next, we have the south elevation drawings, the top being existing, the bottom being proposed, and then further wider, sort of more street view elevations, given the wider context of the site in relation to the area, but still the same south elevation. Next, we have a photograph of the site itself from the rear, say with the listed properties along neighbouring, which are located to the west of the site, just beyond the dwelling itself. And then further photographs looking towards the rear of the dwelling. Next, we have the east elevation drawings, the existing being that in the top left of the slide. And then again, further sort of given more context with the actual access running between the site itself and what is labelled as Pond Cottage there. Here we have a photo which is looking towards the east elevation from within the site's garden. Next, we have the west elevational drawings, where it's sort of like a section through. So the black outline is that of the listed building of the neighbouring properties located to the west, where you can actually see the red outline is that of the existing building. And then again, further sort of wider contextual sort of elevations. Here we have a photograph with the dwelling itself being on the right hand side of that photo, the white dwelling, with the left hand dwelling being the neighbouring property, which is also the listed building. And then this one is unfortunately labelled incorrectly in the slide. However, this is looking towards the listed building of the neighbouring property itself, where we can see the levels change between in order to the neighbouring property's garden. Here are the existing proposed ground floor plans, followed by the first floor plans existing in top, proposed in bottom, and followed by the actual proposed roof plan, where we can see the roof plan of the existing, of the proposal in relation to neighbouring properties. And then here we have a view which is looking down the access towards the dwelling itself. Is say with the dwellings nearest to the photo on the right hand side being that of the neighbouring properties which are listed, and the left hand one is say with the dwelling furthest away just by the tree being that of the actual site itself. And here we have the plans which show the store plans which are located towards the eastern side of the boundary, eastern side of the site itself, along with a photo from within the garden itself, looking towards that area, the eastern boundary where the store will be located, followed by a view from within the access, which runs along the north of the property, along the north boundary, where the store will be located, along with the existing access and the dwelling in the background. That concludes this presentation, with the offer of recommendation being for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've just realised that perhaps I should just declare a personal but not prejudicial interest in that. I believe Mrs. Bullock was in fact a councillor many years ago. I've been here many years, so I'm not sure that anyone else remembers her. Anyway, I haven't obviously spoken to her since she left the council and not obviously discussed this application. Sorry for the late announcement. So, public speaker, we have one objector, Sue Hall. If you'd like to come forward, Ms. Hall. Good afternoon. Ms. Hall, you have 3 minutes, and if you'd like to press the bottom of the microphone, that turns the microphone on. A red light will come on. And the clock is in front of you and will count down your 3 minutes. When you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you for letting me come and speak. I'm actually speaking on behalf of myself and 2 other neighbours. We live very close to the property, number 10. I live in number 2-4, and the replacement dwelling, we have no objection to it whatsoever. It's beautiful. In fact, it will be an enhancement. But as you notice from those photographs, the access to the cottage is very narrow. My neighbour, who lives at number 6 and 8, which is the one immediately next, is only 1.2 metres away, which again you saw. We need a survey done to make sure that demolishing the property will not damage our property. It's a listed building. They are timber frame with brick. There's no foundations. They're 300 years old. We have rooms underground, and we just feel that there will be movement and we need a survey done. So until that survey is done, then, we can't approve it. Also, there's lots of other stipulations that we put to Mr. and Mrs. Bullock, which we haven't had written confirmation that they agree with. So until again those are agreed, we can't approve this, because we want the survey. We want a risk assessment done for the demolished building. We need, sorry, I'm just reading it. Agreed compensation for any damage that's caused to our properties. The foul sewer drain from my property in number 6 and 8 runs underneath number 10, and the surface water runs down the lane. What's going to protect those whilst demolition is going on and the rebuild is going on? And the lane's very narrow. It is 3 metres in some places. How can you get a large vehicle down there carrying heavy building materials up and down it? And when the building's finished, we would like the lane repaired to how it should be, because Mr. Rowden and we fund keeping that lane in the order that it's in. And we don't want any construction vehicles parked outside our houses on the lane or outside Pondview cottages, because parking for residents is awful. So if there's construction vehicles out there, we'd never be able to park our own cars. And also the Soak is a really busy road on a very nasty bend. How are construction vehicles going to get down the lane? Because it is very, very tricky. And the neighbouring properties are all very, very close, and we want agreed working hours that are not outside Monday to Friday, and an assurance that none of the building material will be taken into the stream, because it's a chalk stream.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just
There might be some questions for you of clarification from the committee. Councillor Pearson.
Two quite brief ones. Can I call you Sue? Because I'm never quite sure how to address a lady these days. I normally speak archaic language, which so I get slapped on the wrist for it. The officer report refers to a concrete slab, which basically that slab is to remove the need for foundations in the sense that you're talking about. Because 300 years ago, they didn't have foundations. So when I first moved out to this area, I lived in a house that was on a concrete slab with piles underneath to retain the stability of the house and the neighbouring houses, because there had been a pond where my house was built. It sounds curious, but it worked very successfully. So that is what that's about. Were you aware of that? Well, I hope that helps.
We've not had any correspondence with Mr. and Mrs. Bullock since before they put the application in.
Yeah. And the other question I have is perhaps a silly one in retrospect, is you want the lane to be restored to how it used to be. Well,
how it is now.
Yeah, that would have been a cart track.
Sorry?
Well, originally it would have been, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Well, it's I
didn't hear you.
I know it's a very sensitive area, but if you go back to when it was built, that's what it would have been. And I think I understand what you're saying. Yes, you want a hard surface there.
No, I don't want to. No. Mr. Roden and I, who I live in 2 and 4, he lives in 6 and 8, which are immediately along that lane.
Right.
And we pay to have the gravel put down, any repair that needs to be done. He and I, and actually number 14, we pay to have that done. So if it's damaged and not put back to how it is, then we're kind of out of pocket. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Well, the bit about the slab, I'm not sure. I didn't understand what you said about the slab. What do you mean?
Sorry, that basic's what I think that's what I'm talking about. I'm sure Cameron will correct me if I'm completely wrong. But I say my house was a 5-bed house built on a concrete slab where a clay pit used to be, and with piles underneath to retain the stability of the house so it didn't impact anywhere else. When it rained very heavily after it was built, our house didn't move an inch. All the neighbouring houses, which didn't have a concrete slab, they all subsided.
How can we tell if our house has got a concrete slab?
Well, it's instead of a foundation, because foundations go down into the ground, and which is a modern development, started at the beginning of the 20th century. Houses before that didn't have foundations; they were built flat on the ground, and that's why so many of them have been lost, because effectively they collapsed.
Well, it was
Councillor Pearson, you are straying into building regulations.
Sorry.
Which is why we think a survey needs to be carried out to see what state that our properties are in.
I'm sure Cameron will advise if you may.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Could I just clarify? So you're in 2 and 4, your neighbour in 6 and 8. Are you all connected? So are there sort of services for which all of you are joined? Sewerage? Are you all somehow on the same system and piped accordingly?
My house and number 6 and 8 are connected. They go underneath then the property of number 10. Whether number 10 is connected to it, I don't know. But the floor level of our drains is much lower than the floor level of the ground for number 10. So I'm not sure whether they're connected. And that this is why we think there could be some movement, because the number 10's property is here and our properties are down here. And but specifically number 6 and 8 is only 1.2 metres away. So that knocking down, all that movement could dislodge the underground rooms. And we have their rooms, you know, they're not basements, they are rooms because they're open on the back face of the house.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask another question? Thank you. In terms of the accessibility there, it is a very tight spot, and so you were expressing a great deal of concern about access for vehicles and the like. What is the common practice now in terms of accessibility to the properties? How does that work? Does the milkman come down? Does the dustman come down?
The dustman doesn't come down now. Still, a transit van is just about accessible down there. But my neighbour, Mr. Rodens, had his steps damaged on numerous occasions because they've just clipped it as they've gone down. It is very narrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reid.
So can we just establish in my own mind, that particular lane is private property?
No. It's unadopted.
Sorry?
Unadopted. Nobody owns it.
But you pay for the upkeep, so it's not
It's
adopted.
because nobody else does. And we don't.
Does number 10 pay towards it as well?
Tim and I,
Yes.
and
Okay.
number 14. There's 3 of us that pay to keep the upkeep nice.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it, Ms. Hall, for questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last public speakers are Mr. and Mrs. Bullock, who are the applicants. Good afternoon. And you have 3 minutes, and you can either share it or one person can speak on behalf of both of you. And the clock will indicate when your 3 minutes are up. When you're ready.
Good afternoon. My name is James Bullock. This application is to demolish a poor quality, damp, unlisted 3-bedroom house and replace it with an architect designed, energy efficient 3-bedroom house, which is future proofed for our final years. As you will have seen from the number of documents associated with this application, there's been a great deal of professional input, so I welcome the opportunity to present the human story. My parents bought number 10 The Soak in 1964, and I lived there until I married. When my mother died, I inherited the house, and it has been rented to a series of tenants at a level increasingly below market and even housing benefit rates because of its unmodernised condition. For the past year, it has been occupied by a friend for a peppercorn rent. But even he has now even moved out because of the cold and damp conditions. In 2021, we sold our family home of 37 years in Brandine with the intention of moving to Alsford, where we had both grown up. We aimed to renovate number 10, bring it up to present day standards. However, when we obtained professional advice, we were somewhat shocked to be advised that it would be uneconomical and possibly even unachievable to modernise the existing house. This is due to the structural condition of number 10, which has no foundations and has signs of movement in the walls and the first floor. So in October 2021, we submitted a pre-planning application to demolish and rebuild. This was supported without prejudice after extensive work and consultations by your officers in June 2022. A full application was submitted in August 2022. Although the design has generally been favourably received, we very much understand the concerns of our neighbours about the build process. But some disruption is unavoidable whatever we do to the house. Your officers are proposing a pre-commencement condition to agree details of the construction process, and we are happy to accept this condition. The statutory and technical consultees are raising no objections. Number 10 is currently unoccupied as it is now not really of a rentable standard. I do hope that you are able to consider granting permission for a building that we believe will, on completion, enhance this area of Alresford. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think there are some questions for you. Councillor Rotter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that presentation. Obviously, we would love to hear that you can reassure your near neighbour about the way that you're going to have the house demolished and rebuilt. I know that our conditions ask for all sorts of reassurances as well. Some of what was asked about will be covered by building regulations as well, so not within the remit of this committee, sadly. But is there anything you want to add to what you've just said that might reassure your neighbour, please?
I would like to state that it's not really a demolition, it's a deconstruction, because we are aiming to reutilise more than 3/4 of the materials that the current house is built of. All of the flints are going to be adequately reusable in the new house. The brickwork can be used for hardcore. The only thing that we intend to take away is the metal and the woodwork. Because of the access issues, we want to reuse as much as we can, and we're going to do it quite carefully and quite slowly. But it's not, in the classic terms, a demolition. It's a deconstruction. I have taken advice from a number of builders about supporting next door house whilst we do that, and we have a plan in place to basically make sure that there is going to be no movement caused by the next door, by any work that's done on a house. And that is going to be done through some form of construction from the new foundations supporting the neighbour's wall whilst we do the build work. But we're not in a rush. We've been planning this for 37 years. I'm not, going to rush about and do a rapid demolition, which might be her main concern.
And there was just the question of reinstating the lane if it gets damaged and protecting the stream.
Yes, that is the number one priority. One of the things we've got to do, though, is the river wall has broken down, which has caused a lot of the subsidence, and we do have to strengthen that river wall. But we will take every precaution for any spillages into the river.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Laming, followed by Councillor Horrell.
I'm curious, how old is the house if it hasn't got any foundations?
Oh, my.
About 200 years. It was certainly built before the sewers were laid. The sewer goes in the concrete path between the two houses. Although the Southern Water map shows it underneath our house, it is actually in between the two houses. It was built as a barn for the next door's house. Was a granary, and this was a storage barn. And it was converted to habitable accommodation, I would think, in more than 150 years ago. And there were 4 houses on the site. When my father bought it in 1964, the second house was knocked down in 1949, but there were 2 more houses further down.
You're aiming to actually reuse the bricks from that house. Will you have trouble being able to match them with new ones because they'll be a different size?
we can aim as use as much as we can from the house because we don't really want to pay to take it away.
Councillor Horrell?
Thank you, Chair. You, I think, indicated in your speech that your preference originally was to renovate because demolishing in a conservation area is a pretty dramatic step to take. Is that just cost at the end of the day, or that you couldn't achieve a standard of the building through renovation? I'm just curious as to why demolition or deconstruction is the best answer relative to where you perhaps started in your thinking.
The advice that we had is that as soon as you start any work on that house, it will fall down. If the bedroom, my parents' bedroom slopes 9 inches and it springs, it's virtually uninhabitable, and any serious knocking about will cause the house to fall down, which is, you know, it will happen, and that's why we've chosen not to renovate it. It's got no foundations, and it's very, very damp. There's water ringing coming down the inside of the walls. The windows are crystal windows from the 1950s, and it's cold. I can remember it being very cold.
Thank you. And Chair, may I just ask, what conversations have you had, a theme from today, about talking to your neighbours and sort of reassuring them, so the others who are in the run of houses there, about your intentions and your desire to make sure things are taken slowly and right? Have you had conversations with everyone to reassure them about your approach? Thank you.
I actually met with the neighbours at the beginning of this process, partway into the process, but a lot of their concerns were to do with the build process, and at that stage we were not at that stage with them, because we were waiting to get the pre-planning application supported and then the planning application supported. So we've only just lately started to talk to builders, and we have taken the steps of asking the people that have come to give a quote as to the impact, the likely impact on the surrounding properties, and we've got some we've had some advice on that, but obviously we're waiting to get the planning permission before we go any further forward. But we really do want to engage with the neighbours, because after all, we've got to live there. And as was pointed out, it's a very tight area, and the last thing we want is to not be friendly with our neighbours.
Thank you.
Councillor Ashwell?
Thank you, Chair. Could you just explain what would happen to the building if nothing is done to reconstruct it, if it's left as it is? If the building is left as it is now, if you don't get this permission, what do you think will happen to the building eventually?
I didn't really hear the question.
So I think what you're asking is what would happen if we don't get planning permission, basically. The answer is we don't know. I don't know what could be done, because as my husband has pointed out, I think if we start interfering with the structure of the house, it's actually going to fall down. The roof is supported by literally tree branches. The first floor is coming away from the side walls. There's a bulge in the wall that's visible. So, I mean, I guess what we would do is we would submit a planning application for an extension, and when we started work, inevitably, I think the building would fall down.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. and Mrs. Bullock, for coming along. And obviously you're going to stay for the rest of the application. Cameron, anything you wish to add from the public participation?
So I've got nothing further to add, but just in regards to the reference to the foundations, just would you mind sort of highlighting that, what section that was in, just for my sake, for clarity with that.
concrete floats retain stability. It also would protect any archaeological evidence actually underneath that float. But if we've heard this house is virtually going to collapse of its own accord, to recycle the material is the best we can do, and retain the integrity of this conservation area. It's a very sensitive area, this, as you know, Cameron. That basically is the reason for those floats, to retain this stability. It's unfortunate the neighbouring houses don't have that advantage. Any house without foundations eventually is going to come down. In this case, it's gone too far without what Mr. and Mrs. Bullock are proposing, in my opinion.
Do you mind if I just picked a few things up, Chair?
No, yes.
I think when we heard from the objector, I won't list them, but we heard a number of things and a number of uncertainties, I think, and they do sit outside of the planning process. You know, there was about movement concerns, requiring a survey, risk assessment, compensation, etc. I mean, the building regulations will deal with the structural side of development, and it's something beyond our powers, so we can't require those. I think the speaker also mentioned working hours, and we do have our informative 4, which recommends the building the normal environmental protection team recommendation on working hours to be 0800 to 1800 Monday to Friday, and 0800 to 1300 on Saturday, and not on Sundays or public holidays. In terms of construction vehicles, it's really hard for us to control, as you know, where construction vehicles park. They're allowed to use the public highway. I appreciate this is an unadopted road, and we won't have any powers there, but we are recommending, I think Cameron has it at condition 12, a construction environmental management plan, and that will ask the applicant and their whoever builds for them to actively consider that. And it talks about construction vehicle routing, the parking of those operatives, loading, unloading, boundary hoarding and lighting. So I think as far as our powers allow us to, we've recommended conditions to you, Chair. So I think sure that covers quite everything, but I think I just wanted to reassure members and the member of the public, as far as we can, it's in our recommendation to you.
Thank you. Yes, I've missed it's condition 12, isn't it? I missed that, and I was going to ask, was there one? But there is. Condition 12, construction management plan. So I was opening the report out to questions on anything. Could I just ask, my favourite question is the biodiversity, and in particular bats and swifts, because this is an ideal setting for both of those creatures. Has any provision been made for that, Cameron?
But yes, I have had a consultation with our ecology team, in which they sort of set out a list of conditions in order to sort of address sort of ecological harm in regards to sort of the area itself, and also to the river, which sort of potentially affecting the SSSI. And say through that's gone to Natural England, where they've sort of agreed to that same condition in order to, let's say, protect sort of ecology.
I can't see a condition mentioning that.
So we've got condition 10 and 11. So condition 11 talks about the biodiversity enhancements and mitigation plan. So we don't particularly sort of highlight swifts, but I think Cameron can have regard to that when the details are submitted to us. I'm just, having read that, I'm just wondering if we ought to have another rider on their, Chair, as well, to say that it talks about external lighting to be agreed in writing by the LPA, and I'd want to add a line there to say, and then undertaken in accordance with those approved details.
Yeah, it doesn't mention swifts and bats by name, does it? Whereas normally we do mention them.
Thank you, Lorna, Chair.
Lorna?
Thank you. In response to some of the previous committees, we'd had an informative, so I did put that one on the end of this report, and will do in future for where it's all relevant, which then just highlights specifically about enhancements, that consideration of different bird species is relevant in our district.
Well, I'm not going to let it go. I don't see why it's an informative when normally it's a requirement.
The enhancements are the requirement, but then the informative just gives further information about what we expect to see in the enhancement.
I think condition 11 is doing what you want it to do, although it doesn't explicitly say swifts and bats. And I think what Lorna's saying is informative 9 particularly says give, greater promote and give greater emphasis to avian wildlife roosting, nesting for swifts, hedge sparrows, bats during and after completion of the development. So I think they kind of go hand in hand.
Tell you why I missed it, because it's not normally in the informative.
No,
it's normally a condition.
So it's in condition 11 and then linked with the informative, Chair. I think your officers are happy that we've got both there.
Well, Cameron, you've noted my comments. Any other questions? No debate. Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank Mr. Bullock for coming forward with this application and saving the site and getting advice and producing something which fits within the Alresford conservation area, old Alresford conservation area, sorry, new Alresford conservation area. It's a very sensitive site, as the Bullocks, I'm sure, have discovered now. If they haven't, I'm sure they're going to be told very quickly. It is this issue that's quite clearly the ground is semi-waterlogged. And I know from our own experience, the value of these, well, it's described as a concrete slab. It's in actual fact as a concrete slab that covers the whole site of where you're going to put your building. And the conditions referred to piling, well, basically what happens is you drive piles down below this slab to keep the slab level so you don't get the subsequent happenings that's already impacted on the existing building. In other words, it stays level, you retain the integrity of the building. And I very much approve of that technique in this location. I like the design that you come up with. To my mind, it fits very well in this location again. The application lane is shared responsibility of anyone who lives along that lane. It's pretty common in the area. Certainly we've got them in the village in Swanmore, where parish council owns half of the lane and the residents own the other half. And then it comes to agreement how you're going to maintain the integrity of that lane. The biodiversity aspect is very important also in this site. I noticed from what Cameron's shown us, there are green walls proposed. I hope those do eventually come through, but also because Alresford Pond is in behind here, that biodiversity element becomes very, very important as well, not just for the architecture fitting in what we've got. I approve very much of recycling the materials. That means there's less stuff taken off the site, it's retained and used in the rebuild. I can't think of any possible reason why I would say I would vote against this. Thank you very much for the report, Cameron, and thank you for the public response. I hope that has clarified some of the situations. Not, well, I won't say not many people don't know about it. Maybe they do, I don't know. But you really, the words you have is not going to come from this side. Thank
Councillor
you.
Reid, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very interesting proposal that's been put forward. The word that I think Councillor Pearson was looking for was a raft foundation. You build off the raft, so you don't get that sudden movements in any direction. I think what was interesting was Mr. Bullock. I was sat here thinking that was never a house when it was first constructed, and he's confirmed that it was obviously an outbuilding or some other type of use, but definitely not a residential property of any description. The way the roof has been formatted with its timbers, it is a very early 19th century, late 17th century construction, using literally go out into the woods, cut your timber, and come back and construct your roof. So it's normal, a normal thing. What I like about this particular proposal is the finish, the barn style windows with a flint background. That's going to be a very interesting build. It's going to be a challenging build because I think it'll have to be built from the inside out, because you can't put scaffolding where people are going to try and drive cars. So it's going to be a very interesting, a very challenging build, and I look forward to seeing the final completion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further contributions to debate? So, Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Bullock for filling in the background. I now understand much better why the recommendation is as it is today. However, I do think there are some real concerns from your neighbours, and clearly from what the officer has said, there's a limit to what we can do to ensure the right conditions are in place to reassure the neighbours. So I suppose my request to you, as Mrs. Bullock indicated, is for you to reach out to your neighbours at this point, now that you know, if you have planning permission today, your intent, so that that dialogue can take place, because it is a pretty lonely place if, you know, your house starts to move and foundations, your walls change, through no fault of your own, just simply because of what's going on along the road, as it were. But I'm reassured by Mrs. Bullock's comments that you will reach out, and I hope that that will be the case, because clearly this is in a very sensitive and tight part of the town, and obviously in a conservation area. So I think it's beholden upon everyone to try and join hands and make sure that this goes as well as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further contributions? So this application has been recommended for approval. We have a few amended conditions. Number 3, it's all on the update sheet. So number 3, which is got points of information required. Number 5, number 6, number 7, and number 11. So subject to those amendments, all those in favour of approving this application, please show. Thank you. So that application is approved. Thank you very much. Members, we have one more application. Yes. Yes, I was just going to give you the choice, but you've requested one. So we'll have a short break. I'm sorry for the people who are waiting for the next application, but we've had a very long day. So we will start again at 4:20. We are all here, I think. Is there anyone missing from the public who wanted to be here? So though it's in advance of what we said, we're going to go on to the last planning application of the agenda, item 13, which is 22/02585/HOU, which is Apple Tree Cottage, Northside Lane, Bishop Sutton. Just turn to the right page. And this is the erection of a 2-storey side and rear extension to dwelling at Apple Tree Cottage. The case officer is Cameron again. So when you're ready, Cameron, please start.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this presentation is for the erection of a 2-storey side and rear extension to Apple Tree Cottage. So we have the location plan, which is the top plan, and the site plan at the bottom. The site plan, you can see through the red outline, sort of the extent in which a 2-storey extension will go in relation to the dwelling itself. We have the aerial photograph with the site marked by the yellow triangle. We see the rural nature of the area, followed by the west elevation drawings, with the existing being the top and the proposed being the bottom. Next, we have a photograph of the west elevation itself from in front of the dwelling, followed by another photograph from the actual driveway which leads up to the dwelling itself, and followed by one which is at the access just before you actually get onto the road which serves the dwelling. Next, we have the east elevation, which is the rear. They say again, existing being the top and the proposed being the bottom. We have a photograph showing the existing property to the rear, followed by another which sort of gives you more of sort of the rear elevation along with the side. Next, we have the north elevation, followed by a photo which is sort of again sort of the eastern, sort of the north, which is the side. And on the photo, they're sort of marked out rough sort of where the actual projection of the extension will be on the ground through the tape measure on the right hand side of that photo. Next, we have the south elevation drawings, where there won't be any sort of anything affecting the south elevation, but there will be some views of the proposed extension itself, right hand side. Next, we have the existing proposed ground floor plans, where you can see the existing footprint on the proposed, which are the bottom, through the dashed red outline, followed by the existing and proposed first floor plans, as again, the proposed being the bottom. Here we have the roof plan, where I'll just note that the original size of the dwelling was 103 square meters before the extensions, which on the existing are on the left hand side of the plan and above, which brought it to 126 square meters, whilst the proposed 2-storey extension would create about 160 square meter floor area, which is about 54% increase to the floor area of the dwelling itself. Next, we have a photo which is then actually looking to the northern boundary of the site itself. Then that's the end of my presentation, with the officer recommendation being for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move now to public speakers. And the first public speaker is the Parish Council representative, Councillor David Quirk. Good afternoon. Councillor Quirk, you have 3 minutes allocated, and when you're ready, the timer will start on the screen. And you press the button at the bottom and the red light will come on. I'm so sorry, could you say that again?
Okay. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. By way of introduction, my name is Dave Quirk. I'm a Brighton Parish Councillor who lives in Gundleton, although not adjacent to the applicant's site. I'm also a retired local government officer who, prior to retirement, worked as Director and Deputy Chief Executive for a Hampshire local authority. I mention this as I fully understand why your officers are seeking refusal on policy grounds, but believe in this case a departure from policy is warranted. So I understand why you're recommending refusal. As the officer's report makes clear, the Parish Council are mindful that the proposal would remove a 2-bedroom house from the local housing stock, but feel that the plot size and the reasons behind the proposed extension justify a departure from policy. I'd like to make 3 points to expand on that. Firstly, the policy around small dwellings clearly has links to affordability, and the parish council is in general terms very supportive of the policy. However, it is the case that the applicant's house in its present configuration is beyond the financial means of most young families. Parish Council recognises the need for affordable housing in the parish, and in line with your rural exemption policies, is working with a registered housing provider to explore the potential for affordable housing to be realised in Byton. So we understand your policies and we're working towards them. Secondly, recent planning decisions by yourselves have approved applications resulting in the loss of small dwellings in the parish. Most notable at Hideaway in Byton Lane, Gundleton, where a small bungalow has been demolished to make way for a very large house. In comparison, the Cutters' application for a small extension to their property is, I would suggest, of much less significance. Finally, Chairman, as members will know, in a small village like Byton, there is a strong sense of community, and the Cutters, during their 5 years here, have contributed to that community. Indeed, this is reflected in the number of letters of support that you've received from local residents. We, the Parish Council, would like to see the Cutters be able to stay in the village, expand and raise their family, which is why they want the additional bedroom, and continue to be part of village life. Accordingly, we would urge members to make this possible by approving the application.
Thank you
very much, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. But please stay there because there could be questions of clarification for you from the committee. But no one's indicated that they wish to do so. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
Now we come to the ward councillor slot. I can see Councillor Margot Power and Councillor Russell Gordon-Smith. Councillor Fiona Isaacs did register to speak, but she's not here, and she has written an update on the update sheet. So I presume that will count for her speech. So I don't know who wants to come first out of Councillor Power, Councillor Russell-Smith, right? You have 5 minutes anyway, each of you, when you're ready to start.
My thanks for letting me address the committee, and I appreciate it's been a jolly long day, so I'll be as brief as I can. We've listened to the planning arguments on this case, and the planning officers have made their case and the reasons for turning down the application, and have been very thorough and diligent in their work, and obviously to be commended. To briefly reiterate, the design is quite appropriate to the site. The presentation of the design, I think, is first class, can't be faulted, and it's all very appropriate to the site and to the location. As we've heard, the proposal is supported by the parish and by by the parish councillor, and also by other residents in the district. There's the proposed development has no particular impact on the site, and having looked at the site, one can see that the existing buildings and the adjacent tack room and other bits and pieces, fences, are all in cracking good order, and that makes a very good impression in the district. where unfortunately standards are not the same all the way through Biden. And it's clear that the butlers care deeply for the site and their house and for looking after it. And what it all boils down to is this: it hangs on policy DM3. And the intention of this is to keep low-cost housing for young families. And this is a good principle, and I can't really argue with it. The precise wording in the policy says, the planning authority will consider restricting development rights to prevent further extensions. So will consider, quite critical words there. And I think if we look at the likely scenario, if this is refused, the Cutlers sell up and move to Ropley or Foremarks to get a larger house. The site and the house are very desirable, fantastic views, lovely countryside location. It's difficult to put a value on it, but I did note that on Zoopla, a similar two-bed property with land and outbuildings and so on is on the market for 750,000 in Ropley. So I think we can see that the house would be unlikely to be bought by a young couple struggling to get their foot on the housing ladder. So I think what I would be looking for is some flexibility on this principle, so we can see a young and expanding family living on the site for the next 30 years, fully involved in the social and economic life in the village. We've seen the suggestion made by the local councillor on the fact that they're well integrated in the community and they play a part in it. And that seems a very desirable feature. So I would recommend, I'd like to suggest that the recommendation is overturned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon-Smith. There may be some questions for you. Don't go. Are there any questions? Councillor Rutter.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon-Smith. Could you just reiterate how you think the Planning Committee can justify overturning what is quite a clear policy about keeping small dwellings in the countryside? You're saying that you think that the wording of the regulation means that we have a certain amount of wriggle room.
I can read it back to you. The planning authority will consider restricting development. It doesn't say the planning authority must or should. It says will consider. So I'm just asking for a bit of consideration and some flexibility in this. I think we've all seen examples where sticking rigidly to principles doesn't always have the desired intent. Does that answer the question, Susan?
If I could just, you don't consider that this would be a very dangerous precedent for the Planning Committee to set?
Well, there is always that argument in almost anything. And we've seen in the neighbourhood some very big houses going ahead. You might equally argue that something like that sets a precedent for allowing a certain generosity of interpretation.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, so thank you very much, Councillor Gordon-Smith, and Councillor Power. It's now your turn. As you know, you have 5 minutes. And when you're ready to speak, the clock starts automatically. Or Matthew Power, I'm not sure which now.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee. Apple Tree Cottage is a small house, very well designed, in a lovely site, but it is snug. And as you can see from the plans, the 2 bedrooms have limited headroom. One of the unintended consequences of DM3 is that medium-sized houses are getting bigger and more expensive, but small houses are staying the same size. The addition of a 3rd bedroom and space to work from home will allow us to retain a young family in a rural area, allow the parents to work from home with a minimal increase in the footprint of the building, as is shown in the plans. As some of you will know, our villages suffer from a lack of people under 60. And if we approve these plans, this will allow a family to stay in a rural community, and it is a very strong community. The best attended parish council meetings I have ever seen. By setting aside DM3, and I don't suggest this lightly, we will create, or we will permit a small house to be made into a small family house, and it will still stay as a small house, as it is evidenced by the plans. And I'm supporting approval from this committee and asking you to overturn the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Powell? No. So thank you. Oh, Councillor Rutter.
Thank you. You're determined that this would enable a local family to stay locally, and I think we would all appreciate that. However, as you know, planning conditions and planning decisions are not about people and families who live in the home, but the home itself. And, you know, setting aside an important policy like this cannot be done lightly. And in you know, there's nothing to stop that family just selling, you know, extending and selling and moving on. So we are in a very difficult situation here if we are going to seriously consider that overturning. I'm just wondering if you can further elucidate your justification for this.
I have every sympathy with that policy. I don't think DM3 works particularly well. It does not preserve affordable housing in the countryside. The effect has been that small houses are only suitable for a retired couple, for example. They're not any cheaper, and the larger houses are getting bigger and bigger and being equally unaffordable. I don't ask you to set aside a policy lightly, ever, because there are reasons for it, but I do feel that we have to allow what is a small family house to have more than one child, should they so desire. It's a family unit, and we need children as well as young families in the countryside. Does that answer your question, Councillor Rutter?
That is probably an unanswerable question, but thank you very much, Councillor Power.
Any further questions for Councillor Power? No, thank you very much for coming along today. Cameron, anything you want to pick up on DM3 or no? Okay. So I'm going to ask for questions on anything.
Chairman, do we not have a supporter?
Oh. Yes, I'm sure we have.
Michael Knappett.
Yes. Michael Knappett. I'm so sorry. The committee will tell you that this is a weakness of mine, is to miss out the last public speaker. I'm so sorry. Apologies. So you are a supporter and you have 3 minutes, and the clock will start when you start speaking.
If you could just use your microphone, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Mr. and Mrs. Cutter, the owners of Appletree Cottage, are heartbroken with the recommendation of officers, which is that the application should be refused. My clients wish to remain living in the property, which they love, in a parish in which they take an active part in local activities and events. An extension to the property is required to provide additional ground floor space to enable both adults to work from home and to incorporate a third bedroom so that the couple can have another child. Working from home is now a feature of life for a sizable number of people, and so policy should be more flexible to allow owners to extend their properties further and make them suitable for modern requirements. Policy DM3 within Local Plan Part 2 currently predates the change in working patterns and the shift by some to working from home. Without Policy DM3, my clients would not have been able to afford to move into the village. In fact, they would be unable to purchase their home due to the difference in cost of building it and what it would be marketed at. For this, Policy DM3 should be commended, but it should also allow flexibility for those not able to afford expensive properties to remain in the parish. Property prices are so high in Gundleton and Bishop Sutton that the couple would be unable to afford to buy a 3-bedroom house in the local area, thus extending their current home would be a more cost-effective option. The only property currently available to buy within half a mile of Appletree Cottage has 3 bedrooms and is being marketed at £1,695,000. The current property would only have limited appeal were it to be marketed for sale due to only having 2 bedrooms. It would likely only appeal to older couples with no children. It would also only likely be affordable to such a demographic due to the high house prices in the area. Appletree Cottage originally measured 103 square metres before it was last extended. To facilitate the further extension to the property, part of the previous extensions will need to be demolished. Once extended, the property would have been extended by a total of 54% from the very first original design for which planning on this site was granted. Property's latest extension has been sensitively designed so that it would appear proportionate and subservient to the host dwelling. This would be achieved by using Flint's brickwork within the new extension with roof tiles to match the existing dwelling. Property was constructed to a high level of environmental and sustainable criteria, achieving an A rating energy performance certificate. This is evidence of the couple's intent to remain in the dwelling. As such, the extension is to provide a 3rd bedroom, which has had to be designed around the previous method of construction. I'm advised that there is a need for more 3-bedroom properties within Alresford and Itchen Valley and across Winchester District. The current policy mix requirement of seeking a majority of new dwellings within a development to be 2 or 3 bedroom homes is noted. The proposed extensions to the dwelling would ultimately create a forever home for Mr. and Mrs. Cutter, who wish to continue residing in the village in perpetuity and to keep their ties to the local rural economy. They understand that no further extensions of the property would be possible were this application to be permitted. We hope that you are able to approve this application, contrary to the recommendation of your officers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Do stay, just in case there are any questions for you. No? So thank you very much. Oh, no, I do have a question. Looking at the planning history, and I don't know, Mr. Knappett, when you came into this history, but originally it was just 2 stables and a tap room, which has gradually changed into what we see today. Were you there at the beginning of the process, or?
Sorry, I only became involved before the submission of this latest application.
With what, sorry?
Before the submission of this latest application. I met the Cutters.
For residential?
Yeah, this latest.
I didn't hear you, sorry.
No, he wasn't involved till now, Chair.
Right, okay. So how long have you lived in the property?
He's their representative.
Oh, you're not the owner of the property?
No, the owner of the property sat in the audience, that's Mr. Cutter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for coming along today, because I don't think there are any further questions.
Thank you.
Cameron, anything you'd like to pick up?
No, there's nothing further.
No.
Thank you, Chair.
I've asked you that already.
Chair, but Chair, with your permission, there is just a few, just for clarification, we heard a lot, didn't we, during the deputations about the affordable, it's not affordable in terms of the pricing that was quoted. I think the policy in our text at 6.2.10 does sort of talk about that and reflect on that, and 6.2.11 and talks about it's 6.2.11 particularly says it's recognised that smaller dwellings subject to this policy may not be affordable for all persons in housing need and may still have an above average market price. However, this is to be viewed in the context of the average house price in the local area and the fact that a small dwelling may be to some extent relatively affordable. I tell you that for your deliberations, Chair, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, that's useful. So, Questions on anything in the report? Councillor Rotter.
Cameron, if we did decide that the wriggle room, which our cabinet member assures us is in the policy, were to be used up, what extra conditions would you like to propose to add to this if we were decided to give it permission rather than refuse it?
I'd say I want to check sort of what for the permission when the house was actually built to see if permitted development rights had been removed. Otherwise, if they had not been removed, definitely the removal of permitted development rights on the property itself would be one thing to consider. Should you mind it sort of overturn my recommendation?
Is that all?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything else. And for that, it would just be the removal of permission.
Would you need to see, you know, indications of materials and colours and lighting and all
So
that?
yeah, in regards to the specifics, yeah, it'll be more sort of ensuring that it will be to a high quality to ensure that the finish of the building would then be in keeping and say as high quality as can be. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions? So debate, and unusually I'm going to start. If we look at the planning history on page 254 of our reports, which is what I was talking about with the agent or the representative, because I thought that he was the owner. This was never meant to be a house, this property. It started off as 2 stables and an associated tack and tractor storage room. Then there was a garage added. Then there were amendments to elevations. I don't know what the condition 9 was, but yes.
Chair, I don't think that's correct. You're reading the dates the
Sorry.
wrong way round, I think.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Councillor Horrocks.
Chair, I don't think that's correct. The garage is the latest addition with the latest application in 20.
What, are you saying the report's wrong?
No,
It's just back to front.
it's back to
Okay.
front. The dates are back to
Yeah,
front.
do please explain.
So yeah, in regards to the planning history, it started off, the previous application there was 2020, which is for the creation of 2 stables and associated store, say for the cuts again previously, and then it goes to the 2017 application and then on. So it starts at the newest and then goes towards the oldest.
It's an
I'm not
established,
sure that I've
it's
understood
an established dwelling, Chair, that's been there, I don't know how long. And then what's happened in the meantime is that there's been an extension, and then more latterly in 2020, it looks like there was an application that was approved for some stabling. I don't think it's gone the other way round. It's just that we've written this in reverse to how you normally read it.
I don't think it alters what I'm saying, though, in that there has been a sort of amount of planning creep here with something which was not built for a house and now has become a house. I know it was allowed at appeal. And I'm just rereading DM3 and the consequences of allowing a small dwelling in the countryside to have permission or to be bigger and become a house, family house, and which is what people are asking for. But that's the way it is. Unless we protect our smaller houses in the countryside, we are going to lose them. I totally understand the point of view that the owners of the property are involved in the village, so that they wouldn't be able to stay. I don't accept the theory that from the local councillor that well, it will be sold on and they will make it bigger. It is a small house in the countryside, affordable, and we have a policy to protect that. What is the point of having policies if we then just say, oh, well, in this instance, it's all right? Because it is policy, I'm afraid, and principle against, you know, personal and feelings. And we shouldn't lead with our hearts. We should just lead with our policies, which are going through. We spent a long time establishing these policies. I think I've been through 3 local plans, and they are there for a reason. So I would be disappointed if the committee gave permission for this, because it is against our policies, and I don't think you can get away from that. So anyone else want to contribute? Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, I think we've got to consider what affordable, more affordable in the countryside actually means today. Yes, it is a planning policy, and I agree entirely with you, Chairman, and I understand exactly the reason for that. But the limited number of 2-bed houses in the countryside has meant, since this policy was written or rewritten in the current plan, the cost of 2-bed houses in the countryside is climbing beyond anything we imagined when this policy was first written. That's a reality. You can't change that by saying, no, we cannot allow a growing family to extend an existing house, which I remind you was granted on appeal. It wasn't what we turned it down initially, and yet the planning inspector saw fit to grant it as a house. So that's a reality. I remember shortly after I joined the planning committee, we discussed an affordable house in the countryside. And I think it was a bungalow, cost about 120,000. We discovered, and it was described as affordable by the case officer, supported by the planning policies. We discovered the next day that affordable house actually cost 328,000. Now that was back in, I think it was about 2005. Now the same thing is happening. The most affordable house in my village is now close on £400,000. Now, the description of affordable, which is what we're discussing, has become irrelevant, whether we like it or not, and trying to hold houses down, price houses down in this way, is just not working. It hasn't worked in the last 10, 12, 14 years. So why shouldn't they start behaving? I don't know. The reality is we're not building enough 2-bed houses to replace them. Council houses. We can't build council houses in the countryside as quickly or as cheaply as we want. That's the reality, not stopping a growing family that's taken a home in the countryside. Biden is a very small, was hardly a village, it's almost a hamlet. And I agree entirely what our 2 cabinet members are saying. Yes, the policy is there, but for goodness sake, we have to have some flexibility. If it becomes concrete, we're ignoring reality and market forces. That's the decision we've got to make. It's a very good presentation that Cameron made, and what he says, yeah, no problem with. But once you start talking about the importance of DM3 and trying to hold prices down, I'm afraid we've left the planet. So if I support this, depends on what others have to say, it will only be based on DM3, a policy which I think now is out of date.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Remind me, are we in questions or debate at the moment? We're into debate, because I might want to slip in.
It's been a long day.
I think I want to slip in a question at the end of this. This site seems to be unusual. The original house, as we've heard, was allowed on appeal. I haven't been able to access the reference number to the appeal. Maybe it's just too old and has slipped into an archive. You've got it, great. But I did notice that in 2017, an officer's assessment was the site is against all relevant policy, though permission was granted, which suggests to me that this is not a typical site. And I would suggest one of the reasons why is that although it's a small 2-bedroom house in the countryside, it comes with an enormous plot of land, which has enabled expansion into tack rooms and stables and double garages and so on, so that we have a property which, whilst being 2-bedroom, is clearly far removed from a affordable 2-bedroom house in the country. So I just share that because I think we do have an exception here, but I absolutely hear the ring bells when it comes to setting a precedent for a policy which is so important. And on that reason, I think I'm very tempted to follow the officer's recommendation. But my question is, we've also heard a number of statements about the particular family living in this particular house and how embedded they are in the community, and no doubt wonderful people. But my question is, to what extent in a planning decision are we able legally to take such factors into account?
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, an application came in for what I would call a smaller property in my patch. But I was told it measured over 120 square meters. Okay, accept that. This property now goes from boundary to boundary, and there's hardly any garden left whatsoever. Whereas at one time it had a reasonable sized garden. It is enormous. I understand the reason for wanting to keep small properties in the countryside. We are told by English law is set by precedent. However, time and time again, I've been told by our former planning legal person that we must make that such planning applications should be judged on their own merits. The fact is, at this point in time, thanks to Councillor Gordon-Smith, we have come across one word in the policy that is a word of interpretation. We can decide one way or the other. Now, there are people around this table that have gone against policy in the past. So it's not a surprise that we may wish to do it again. I believe the fact that this particular family, that is to some degree irrelevant because families change. It's the property that stays the same. I believe, though, this property is possible to have a modest extension, which is what's been planned. Looking at the fact that they got the actual original construction under appeal, and the fact that our policies are getting, shall we say, whiskers on them, if this was to go to appeal, it would be an interesting case to see how the inspector would judge it. I, Chair, would on this occasion, and I don't do it very often, but I will not be in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chair. I also have difficulty with the recommendation as it sits at the moment, but I'd like to draw attention to a different part of the policy, so section 628 of the policy, where they define smaller, which is interesting because we've been talking about 2 bedrooms and so on. So in this policy here, it says that there's a particular bias towards houses with 4 or more bedrooms, and correspondingly lower percentage of smaller brackets 1 to 3 bedroom properties. So it is defining a smaller property in this context as a 1 to 3 bedroom. I know the policy itself talks in square meters, but smaller is defined as a 1 to 3 bedroom property. And it goes on to say, particularly in the countryside where new housing is generally inappropriate, the loss of smaller dwellings is difficult to rectify. So, you know, I understand exactly why Cameron has come forward with his recommendation. I know exactly what the wording is within the policy, but there are occasions when sometimes you need to interpret the policy in the right way for the circumstances. And I concur with many of the comments that my fellow councillors have made, that in this circumstance, with this history of this particular property, then the spirit of what we would allow, should be minded to approve this application, still says that this is a smaller property. It happens to contravene the precise wording of the policy, unless we take Mr. Gordon-Smith's or Councillor Gordon-Smith's pointing out that we can consider. But I am torn with this one, and I believe that should we be minded to approve the application, we are approving a smaller property, which is the spirit of what we want to do with this particular policy area.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for reminding us of our DM3 policy. I've been in this room at the participation table talking about the small dwellings in the countryside, and I've been a huge advocate for preserving dwellings, those smaller dwellings that are so important to the balance in rural communities. But sadly, this committee has not been consistent in the application of that policy. I can give you 2 examples in my own village of a 2-bedroom bungalow that's now a 5-bedroom executive home, and a 1-bedroom bungalow that's now a 4-bedroomed executive home. I pleaded at the time to keep the small houses because that's what the village required, but sadly the committee did not agree with me. And today I'm minded to take on board the very strong local representations that we've received to actually extend this house to allow the 3rd bedroom. I take your point, Chair, on the planning history, but I actually think in this instance we're still preserving a small house in the countryside. And as Councillor Edwards said, it seems slightly disproportionate, the size of the house, to the plot that it's on. So I think, Chair, if we're going to stand by DM3, we have to stand by it. It has to be consistent. We haven't been, and I think on this occasion, we could all make an appropriate decision to actually allow this extension for this particular property. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. DM3 was put in for a particular reason, that was to keep in the village in the bounds where we've got property that young people can buy and live in. In my opinion, this extension to this home still falls within a small property, and it is important that we keep a village alive with young people. Without children in the village will die, and that's one of the reasons that DM3 was put in. So by allowing this, we're still keeping in my opinion, the whole reason for having DM3. So I shall be voting that particular way.
Thank you. Councillor Rochford, do you want to speak?
Yes, I do, Chair, and I am very conflicted with this application because I totally understand the wishes of the family, and I do consider that actually, in real terms, for all of us living in our homes looking at this application, this is a modest proposal. It's not going to end up with a gargantuan house. There's a lot of land there, as we've seen. It's the potential to put a huge house there would be enormous. This application is not for that. This application is for a very modest extension, just to enable the family to continue living there. But planning decisions are not attached to a particular family, and that is what is conflicting me. But I do think that we need to be flexible in our interpretation of these policies, and as Councillor Gordon-Smith pointed out, that flexibility, that possibility of considering some wriggle room is there in the policy. And I think that at this stage in our local plan, it is evolving into something quite different in the next phase. So I think we need to be much more able to interpret our local plan and consider each application, as we are always encouraged to do so, each application on its own merits. And I don't think it's unreasonable to consider this application in those terms, that this is a very modest proposal, and that we can put conditions on it if we do decide to give it permission that would then restrict any further development without it at least coming through the planning process. So I think I'm going to not agree with the officer recommendation on this occasion, and agree with many of my colleagues that we do need to look forward and encourage a family to stay in the village. So that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that brings us to the point where we vote. This application has been recommended for refusal. All those in favour, please show. That's me. And those who have the opposite view, who want to approve, do I have to?
No, do against the recommendation.
Sorry?
Do against the recommendation first.
So we need a recommendation as to why we're approving.
Chair, no,
Yeah.
you do a vote
I
for
think
those.
we are.
Sorry, Chair, you're assuming that everyone else is going to.
I'm sorry, I can't
Agree.
hear you, Councillor Pearson.
Let's finish the voting. You're assuming that everyone is going to vote
I've
against.
just been told by the.
So, Chair, you've asked for the vote for those in favour of the recommendation. It was just yourself. So you now need to know the other half, which is those against the recommendation.
We've done it, those against the recommendation.
Right, thank you, Chair. So that motion falls away. Now we need a new
So
motion.
abstention? What?
Now we need a new motion, member. So it's a matter for you as to whether or not someone wants to place a motion on the table contrary to the officer's recommendation, and the motion being to permit. But it's a matter for members if someone wants to table that motion.
Don't we have to discuss conditions?
I need a member to come forward with a proposal to permit, and then we vote on that. So Councillor Reid is proposing.
So we have a
Councillor
proposer and a seconder. So the motion has been put on the table to permit this application. Those in favour?
Hang on, can we have some conditions?
I don't know. I've been told, this is what I've been told. When do we put the conditions in?
Chairman, let me help you here from this point on.
Yeah.
This is something Daniel has done in other authorities. We've not necessarily done it this before, but actually we've had a motion from Councillor Reid to table a recommendation for approval, which I think has been seconded by Councillor Laming. And now it would be useful for your officers to hear from those members that perhaps are going to take a vote to approve shortly. If you can give us your planning reasons why, so as they can go in the report as to why, in this case, you feel it's appropriate to make, and I'm going to use the word departure from your policy DM3, and why you think in this case, some of the circumstances I've heard you say, but just for the benefit of the minutes, Chair, why, in this case, you're making a departure and you'll vote to approve, I assume. When other cases that come either before us or you would take a different view. It just helps, that certainty and not setting that precedent, Chair. So that's just what would be useful if we could just hear from members, Chair.
Although I didn't vote that way, I think one of the reasons is that it's a small increase in size and won't affect the loss of the smaller dwelling in the countryside. Could we remove permitted development rights?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did look at that and I looked back at the original appeal decision, and permitted development rights were approved when this dwelling was approved as a departure then from our normal policies. The appeal inspector gave weight to personal circumstances in that case, which was a long-running enforcement case on a mobile home. So the permitted development rights have already been removed for this dwelling, so we wouldn't need to do it again, and any future extensions to this property would require planning permission.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful to add an informative on your, when you come to vote, if you do approve it, that decision, to link that back to the original appeal for the avoidance of any doubt. If I could just go through what I heard when debate was happening, Chair, if that would help. We've heard about, and you've kindly articulated that it's a small increase in size. It's a 54% increase, but it's on a 103 square metre dwelling. And I think what members, to my mind, are saying, and you'll need, I don't want to put words in your mouth, saying that, that increase with the resultant dwelling being 157 by my maths in the report, is still a relatively small dwelling. It's above our 120 square metre classified small dwelling, but you're satisfied that retains and remains a relatively small dwelling in the countryside, and it doesn't breach that 3-bedroom threshold, which is referenced in 6.2.8, I think. I think, if this helps, what I heard was members saying, well, it's not affordable relatively anyway. Perhaps, I don't know if you'd want to give weight to this, at the personal circumstances of the applicant and that community support that was set out by Councillor Power for this 3-bedroom. Maybe that links to the first point anyway. And then that we didn't identify any, as your officers even didn't identify any other harm in terms of its design or impact in the landscape. So maybe that, if that helps, Chair, I'd leave members to confirm whether that was their summary.
Is it possible to include something about it makes it a more sustainable site because it enables working from home and that sort of thing?
I just think that's an argument you'd repeat everywhere, isn't it? And if you gave that as a precedent for making a departure to this policy, then yeah.
So members, the reasons that Julie has given, are you in agreement with those? So given that, this is the way I do it, given the reasons that you've proposed, and we've had a proposer and seconder, could you please vote that you agree to granting permission for the reasons that Julie has given us?
I'm really sorry, Chair, before you do that,
yeah,
we would want to add a standard 3-year time limit that the works commence. We may need to condition the plans and materials. I don't know the detail of that. Perhaps you delegate that back to your officers. Is there any other need, Cameron, for anything else? Any
informative of the working hours?
And the normal informatives.
Lighting.
It's a dwelling. I don't think we drill down to that level of detail. Normally on a household.
It's normal, but subject to the base conditions, that further elements such as times and things like that be agreed between the chairman and the head of.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure members were aware of, we will draft the wording out fully, but just so as you're aware, that would be where.
And I normally always copy in the ward councillors, even if they weren't here for the hearing of the application.
Yeah, I agree with anything that's been said, Chair, but somewhere within the system, the current people have got to look at exactly what they mean by affordable or more affordable, because even making this a 3-bed house is still, well, even a 2-bed house is hardly affordable in the countryside nowadays. If they sold and moved out, it wouldn't be an affordable price.
Yeah, I think we've got very hung up on prices, so I'd rather not mention prices at all.
If affordability is the crucial.
Anyway, that's the proposal, subject to.
Take a vote.
Yeah. So those in favour of that proposal, please show.
Chair.
Those against?
1.
And abstentions?
1.
So that application has been approved, and the officers will be in touch with the reasons that we've given. Thank you. So we now move to our last paper, which is the appeals paper. We'll just wait for members of the public to go.
Sorry.
No.
This in the countryside.
It's on page 143 if you're looking. Right, this is our record of how we've done on appeals. We see on page 145 the amount that we've won and lost and costs and so on. And we don't want to pick on particular appeals unless they there's a point of principle to learn.
Interesting to hear a little bit more about item 3, the equestrian centre, because this was overruled by the committee on an officer's decision.
Yeah.
We felt we were on safe lands.
But it's been allowed, yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask about one, although it's in my ward, because it was gypsies or travellers, one of those type application, and they've asked for an extra mobile home and touring caravan and day room, and they've already got that. So are we to allow extra sites on gypsy and traveller sites like this? I'm surprised at it being allowed.
I think it won't come as a surprise to this committee that, you know, in terms of defending gypsy and traveller applications, we're on a fine balance. We need to make sure we've got what's called a 5-year supply. And that, you know, is very close. I don't know if that was the reason in this case why we lost this appeal.
No.
But actually, my recollection was that there was a need at this site for an additional pitch, and the inspector felt it was reasonable.
Could I request, does it come under your domain, Julie? Could I request that ward councillors are kept informed of these decisions? Because I certainly wasn't informed about this decision. And possibly other ward councillors can say the same about their wards.
Chairman, when we get the decisions, our appeals officer does circulate them internally and to the ward members. I can check what happened with this one, but you know, I do see them all coming through, you know, because I mean, I check, you know, how did we do? Were the costs awarded or not? And so if this one slipped through the net, I apologise.
Well, all I can say is that I didn't receive, and perhaps my fellow councillors did. Councillor Pearson, you wanted to, oh no, was it Councillor Reid wanted to ask about the equestrian centre?
Yeah, Chairman, I remember this one coming through planning committee. It was a first floor extension, and I think your officer did recommend approval for this. I appreciate it was, you know, it's a decision of the council. I'm not trying to
turn it down.
But it was difficult to defend, and the inspector felt it was perfectly reasonable to add that first floor extension. You know, but I would say, you know, whilst that appeal was allowed, we were able to defend the reason for refusal, and the inspector didn't award costs against us for unreasonable behaviour. So I think, you know, that just shows sometimes that when inspectors are looking at things, you know, okay, didn't agree with the committee's conclusion, but he thought there was a case there to argue, and you know, and everyone behaved reasonably within that. So that would be my take on that, Chair. I mean, I suppose just, you know, as a summary, there were only 5 in that quarter, whilst 1 was withdrawn. I normally take that to sort of be on, you know, in terms of, you know, that's a success for us in terms of dismiss. So this quarter was 60-40 in my view, albeit I know it's not quite recorded like that. And we did the appeal that was withdrawn. We were awarded costs because that appeal was withdrawn unreasonably in our view, and the appellant behaved unreasonably in pursuing that and then withdrawing. And we are at the moment just pursuing the reclamation of our costs up until the place when the appeal was withdrawn.
I was going to ask about number 2, which was withdrawn. Do we think that might come back?
I don't think we know, Chair. I don't know if Robert Green's here. Are you shaking your head, Rob? We don't know. No, we don't know, Chair.
Any other questions, members? So that brings us to the end of our meeting. Been what a long day, hasn't it?
Chair, if I could just very quickly to members, it's Therese's final planning committee next meeting in April on the 19th, and we've been thinking of a way that we could mark her final planning committee. We'd like to have a sort of joint lunch, so I think we're going to have a slightly longer lunch break